The house was so cold that morning, I could see my breath drifting through the kitchen like cigarette smoke. At 4:12 a.m., I woke up with my teeth chattering. The furnace had stopped. The digital clock on the microwave was dark. The refrigerator wasn't humming. Even the little stained glass lamp I kept near the window was dead. And sitting in the middle of my kitchen table was a yellow sticky note. Maybe now you'll understand why someone responsible should be managing this house. No signature, no explanation. But I knew exactly who had left it. And for the first time in 66 years, I realized my own family wasn't trying to help me anymore. They were trying to scare me. Hey everyone, Grace here. Glad you're spending a little time with me today. I'll tell you this right away. When grown adults start using fear, cold, unpaid bills, and intimidation against a 66-year-old woman, that's not concern. That's strategy. And strategies usually leave fingerprints. My name is Marjorie Bellamy. I'm 66 years old, a widow, and until recently, I thought I knew exactly who my family was. I lived in a white 2-story house on Sycamore Lane in Cedar Hollow, Pennsylvania. It wasn't fancy. The porch leaned slightly to the left. The gutters rattled every autumn. The winter garden needed repairs. But it was mine. My husband Elliot and I bought it 33 years ago after saving every spare dollar we could find. We raised our son Darren there. We planted the maple tree in the front yard together. We painted every room ourselves. When Elliot died 4 years ago, I thought the hardest chapter of my life had already happened. Turns out I was wrong. The trouble started 11 months earlier when Darren called me on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Mom, I need a favor. Those 5 words should have come with a warning label. He explained that his company was restructuring. Money was tight. They needed a temporary place to stay, just for a few months. That was what he said. A few months. The they included Darren, his wife Whitney, and my 23-year-old grandson, Caleb. I remember standing at my kitchen counter while making tomato bisque when he asked, Mom, it'll help us get back on our feet. Of course, I said, because that's what mothers do. Or at least that's what I thought mothers did. They moved in 2 weeks later. The first month wasn't terrible. Darren was attentive. Whitney brought flowers. Caleb even carried groceries without being asked. Looking back now, it almost feels rehearsed. Whitney complimented my cooking. Darren fixed a loose cabinet hinge. Caleb called me grandma every other sentence. I remember thinking maybe having family around again would be nice. The house had been too quiet since Elliot passed. For a little while, it felt alive again. Then things started changing, not all at once. Little things, the dangerous kind. Whitney decided my kitchen needed modernizing. One afternoon, I came home from church and discovered my spice rack had disappeared. The jars Elliot built by hand were gone, replaced by matching glass containers with minimalist labels. Paprika, thyme, rosemary. Everything looked like a magazine advertisement. I asked where my old rack was. Whitney smiled. Oh, I donated it. Donated, like she was talking about an old newspaper. I stood there staring at the empty space on the wall. That rack had hung there for 27 years. Elliot built it the winter Darren turned 10. Whitney didn't ask. She simply decided. Then Caleb took over Elliot's study. Technically, it was still called my study. But nobody seemed interested in technicalities anymore. One Saturday afternoon, I walked in and found 3 computer monitors covering Elliot's oak desk. LED lights flashed blue and purple across the walls. Headphones hung from the bookshelf. Energy drink cans sat beside my husband's framed military photograph. Caleb, I said carefully, what happened to Grandpa's things? He didn't even remove his headset. Oh, I boxed most of it. Boxed, like memories were seasonal decorations. I found the boxes stacked in the garage later that evening. Photographs, letters, Elliot's pocket watch, the old brass compass he'd carried for 40 years. Everything shoved into storage containers. I cried that night, not loudly, just enough for my pillow to notice, but I told myself they didn't mean any harm. That became my favorite lie. Every uncomfortable moment received the same explanation. They don't mean any harm. When Whitney replaced my curtains, they don't mean any harm. When Darren started calling the house our place, they don't mean any harm. When Caleb laughed because I still balanced my checkbook with a fountain pen, they don't mean any harm. The second month brought something new: control, subtle control. Darren offered to handle all the household bills. At first, it sounded thoughtful. Mom, you're always writing checks. So let me manage the online payments. I can manage online payments. I know you can. Whenever someone says that phrase, pay attention, because what follows usually means the exact opposite. I know you can, he continued, but why should you? Let me help. Whitney nodded immediately. It would take stress off your shoulders. The two of them exchanged a glance. A quick glance. The kind married couples use when they think nobody notices. I noticed. I just ignored it. That mistake cost me months. From then on, I'd give Darren cash or transfer money when bills came due. He handled the rest. At least that's what I believed. 3 months later, I stopped by Murphy's pharmacy to refill my blood pressure medication. That's where something strange happened. A woman named Nora Whitcomb worked part-time at the utility office and volunteered at church. We'd known each other for years. While waiting in line, she lowered her voice. Marjorie, can I ask you something? Of course. Everything okay at home? The question felt odd. Why? She hesitated, then smiled awkwardly. Never mind. No, tell me. Nora glanced around before speaking. I've seen some unusual activity on your utility account. My stomach tightened. What kind of activity? Probably nothing. Nora. She sighed. There have been multiple payment delays. I stared at her. That's impossible? She looked surprised. I assumed you knew. I didn't. Not even a little. And standing there between the greeting cards and cough medicine aisle, I felt the first real crack appear in the story my family had been telling me. Because somebody wasn't paying the bills. And I had a feeling I already knew who. I didn't mention what happened after my conversation with Nora that day. At first, I tried convincing myself she had made a mistake. Maybe she was looking at another account. Maybe there had been a clerical error. Maybe the utility company had mixed up customer records. Funny how quickly the mind starts manufacturing excuses when the truth is standing right in front of it. The drive home felt longer than usual. Gray clouds hung low over Cedar Hollow, and by the time I pulled into my driveway, a cold drizzle had started falling. Darren's black pickup sat beside Whitney's silver SUV, exactly where they'd parked them every day for months. My house looked normal, peaceful, safe. Nothing about it suggested that something ugly was growing inside. When I walked through the front door, I immediately heard laughter coming from the living room. Whitney, Caleb, some reality show blaring from the television. The smell of cinnamon coffee creamer drifted through the air. Everything looked so ordinary that for a moment I almost convinced myself Nora was wrong. Then I noticed a white envelope sticking out from beneath a decorative bowl near the entry table. My name was printed across the front. I picked it up. Final notice. The words felt heavier than the paper itself. My heart skipped. I opened it right there. Past due, payment required immediately. Water service. 32 days overdue. I stared at the amount, then stared again. Because I distinctly remembered giving Darren money for that bill. Not once, twice. "Whitney?" I called. She appeared from the living room carrying a mug decorated with little pumpkins. "Oh, hey, Marjorie." I held up the letter. "What's this?" She glanced at it. Her expression didn't change, not even slightly. Oh. Just oh. Like I'd shown her a grocery coupon. It's probably one of those automated notices. I kept looking at her. "You sure?" "Positive." She smiled. The same smile she'd used when she donated Elliot's spice rack. Those companies send scary letters all the time. Then she walked away. Just like that. No concern, no questions, no curiosity, nothing. I stood there, holding the notice while something deep inside me started whispering. Pay attention. That evening, I waited for Darren to come home. Around 6:30, I heard the garage door open. A few minutes later, he entered the kitchen carrying a takeout bag from Romano's Grill. The smell of garlic Parmesan wings filled the room. "Hey, Mom." I placed the notice on the counter. His smile disappeared. Only for a second, but I caught it. "What happened here?" I asked. He picked up the letter, read it, shrugged. Oh. There it was again. Oh. The family response to financial disaster. "That's it?" I asked. "What?" "Oh." Darren laughed. "You worried me for a second." "It's overdue." "I know." "You know?" "Mom, relax." Relax. Another word that should come with a warning label. I've been juggling some things. What things? The timing got messed up. "Darren, I gave you the money. And it'll get paid?" "When?" He sighed dramatically, the same way he used to when he was 16 and caught lying. "Mom, why are we making this into a federal investigation?" I felt my jaw tighten, because suddenly I wasn't talking to a man trying to solve a problem. I was talking to a man annoyed that I'd noticed one. That night, I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I got up and made chamomile tea. The house was quiet. Everyone else slept peacefully. Meanwhile, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the notice. Something wasn't right. And the more I thought about it, the more little memories started lining up. Like puzzle pieces. 3 weeks earlier, I'd received a late notice from the internet company. Darren said it was an error. 2 months before that, a gas company representative had left a voicemail asking about a payment discrepancy. Whitney told me not to worry. Then there was the missing mail, the missing envelopes, the missing statements, the missing paperwork. I suddenly realized something terrifying. I hadn't physically seen a utility bill in months. The next morning, I decided to test something. Nothing dramatic. Just a simple question. At breakfast, while Whitney was making avocado toast and Caleb scrolled through videos on his phone, I casually said, "Funny thing happened yesterday." Nobody looked up. "What?" Darren asked. "I spoke with someone from the utility office." That got his attention. Not much, but enough. "Oh?" "There seemed to be some issues with the accounts." The room went quiet. Only for a moment. Then Whitney laughed. Government offices always mess things up. I looked at Darren. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Interesting, very interesting. The rest of the day, I watched them. Really watched them. Not as family, as people. That's when I noticed something new. Every time the mail arrived, Whitney got to the mailbox first. Every time. Rain, sunshine. Didn't matter. Whitney collected the mail, sorted it, distributed it. Or at least that's what I assumed. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, I decided to check. I waited until she left for yoga class. Then I walked to the mailbox myself. Inside were 3 pieces of mail: a grocery flyer, a catalog, and an envelope from the county tax office, addressed to me. I froze, because I knew for a fact the mail had already arrived earlier, meaning Whitney either hadn't seen this envelope or she had chosen not to bring it inside. Neither possibility felt good. I opened it immediately. My stomach dropped. Property tax reminder, not yet overdue, but approaching. Fast, very fast. I stood alone at the mailbox while cold wind rattled the maple tree above me. A strange thought entered my mind. What if the unpaid bills weren't accidents? What if they weren't forgetfulness? What if they were building something? A crisis, pressure, fear, something that would force me to depend on Darren. The thought sounded ridiculous, paranoid, almost embarrassing. Until later that evening. Because that night, I overheard a conversation I was never supposed to hear. I had gone downstairs for a glass of water around 11. The kitchen lights were off. Only the glow from the living room remained. Darren and Whitney were sitting together. Neither noticed me. I was halfway down the hallway when Whitney spoke. She's starting to ask questions. Darren groaned. So what? So we're running out of time. My pulse quickened. What do you want me to do? Darren asked. Whitney lowered her voice. I only caught part of the sentence, but the part I heard changed everything. Once she signs the paperwork, none of this will matter anyway. Paperwork. I froze. Every instinct told me to step forward. Demand answers. Force the truth into daylight. But something stopped me. Maybe age. Maybe experience. Maybe survival. Because when people think they've fooled you, they become careless. And careless people reveal things. I quietly returned upstairs, closed my bedroom door, and sat on the edge of my bed until almost dawn. For the first time, I wasn't wondering whether my family was hiding something. I knew they were. The only question now was what those papers actually were, and why they seemed willing to let the bills pile up to get my signature. The next morning, I decided to stop guessing. For months, I'd been treating every strange thing as a coincidence. A missing bill, a delayed payment, a conversation cut short when I entered the room. But once you stop looking at people as family and start looking at their behavior, patterns become impossible to ignore. I waited until everyone left. Whitney had yoga. Caleb disappeared somewhere with his friends. Darren claimed he had job interviews. The second his truck pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my purse and headed downtown. Not to the bank, not yet. I went somewhere much more useful. The county records office. The building sat between the courthouse and an old bakery that had been selling pecan sticky buns since the 70s. I had visited the records office years ago after Elliot died, when I needed copies of property documents. The same woman still worked behind the counter. Her name was Linda Crowley, gray hair, reading glasses, sharp memory. Marjorie Bellamy, she said when I walked in. Well, look at that. Good morning, Linda. What can I do for you? I'd like copies of everything connected to my property. She raised an eyebrow. Everything? Everything. 20 minutes later, I was sitting at a small table reviewing paperwork. Most of it was routine. Tax records, property descriptions, assessment notices. Then I found something that made my stomach tighten. 3 months earlier, someone had submitted a request to change the mailing address connected to the property. The request hadn't been approved because additional verification was required, but it had been started. I stared at the document. My address was listed correctly, but the secondary contact information wasn't mine. It belonged to Darren. For a moment, I simply sat there, looking, reading. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Then I remembered the missing mail, the utility notices, the tax reminders, Whitney rushing to the mailbox every day. Suddenly, the pieces fit together a little too well. Linda. She looked up. Who can submit one of these requests? Property owners. And if someone isn't the owner? She frowned. They shouldn't be filing it. I folded the paper carefully. My hands were steady. Inside, I wasn't. Because this was no longer about unpaid bills. Someone had been positioning themselves around my house, around my finances, around my life, like pieces on a chessboard. And nobody had bothered to tell me I was playing. When I got home that afternoon, I acted completely normal. That part was important. People reveal more when they think you're clueless. Whitney was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone. A half-finished caramel macchiato sat beside her. How was yoga? I asked. She smiled. Wonderful. I smiled back. Good. Then I walked upstairs. Nothing dramatic. No accusations. No confrontation. Not yet. That evening, Darren announced he had good news. We were eating dinner in the dining room. A strange choice because we normally ate in the kitchen. The dining room only appeared when someone wanted something. Mom, he said casually, I've been talking with a financial consultant. There it was. I nearly laughed. The consultant had finally arrived. Oh? He specializes in helping seniors simplify their assets. Whitney nodded enthusiastically. Really smart guy. I cut a piece of roasted chicken. Sounds interesting. He helps people avoid scams. How thoughtful. And he can make sure properties stay protected. I took a bite, chewed, swallowed, then asked the question, what properties? For the first time, Darren hesitated. Well, your house. There it was. Finally, the real subject. Not bills, not convenience, not helping. The house. Whitney jumped in immediately. We just worry about you. That's kind. It would be terrible if something happened. Something happened. Interesting choice of words. I kept eating. The silence made them uncomfortable. Good. Let it. Darren eventually cleared his throat. Maybe you could meet him. Maybe. Tomorrow? Fast. Very fast. Almost like the meeting was already scheduled. Tomorrow's busy. Friday? I'll see. Whitney forced another smile. I recognize that smile now. It wasn't kindness. It was frustration wearing lipstick. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the mailing address request. So, after everyone went to bed, I pulled out the old metal cash box where Elliot and I used to keep important documents. Inside were deeds, insurance papers, tax statements, wills, bank information, everything. I began checking page by page. Around midnight, I found something strange. A folder wasn't where I'd left it, not missing, moved, just slightly. Enough that I noticed. Inside the folder sat a yellow sticky note, a different one from the note on my kitchen table. This one had handwriting I recognized immediately. Whitney's. 3 words. Need her signature. Nothing else. No explanation, no date, no context. Just 3 words. Need her signature. I sat there in silence. The house around me was completely still. Somewhere upstairs, Caleb was probably asleep. Darren, too. Whitney as well. Comfortable, confident. Certain they were smarter than an old woman. For the first time, I wasn't scared. I was angry. Because fear makes you freeze. Anger makes you move. And for the first time since this started, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I was going to let them keep talking, and sooner or later, they were going to tell me everything. The next 2 days became a game. Not the kind with cards or dice, the kind where one side thinks they're winning because the other side isn't fighting back. I let them believe exactly that. Friday morning, I made blueberry muffins. Whitney loved blueberry muffins, especially when she thought she was manipulating someone. She walked into the kitchen wearing expensive workout clothes and that same practiced smile. Something smells amazing. Help yourself. She grabbed one immediately. For a moment, she looked almost guilty. Almost. Then it disappeared. Marjorie, she said carefully, about that financial consultant. I poured coffee. What about him? He has an opening next week. That's nice. The smile twitched. Not the answer she wanted. He really helps seniors. There was that word again. Seniors. The polite version of incompetent. I stirred my coffee. So does my pharmacist. Whitney laughed, a little too loudly. The conversation died, score 1 for me. Around noon, Caleb wandered downstairs. His eyes were glued to his phone. Grandma. Morning. It's noon. Then congratulations. You woke up before dinner. He snorted. For a second, I saw the little boy who used to build blanket forts in my living room. Then he opened his mouth. You know, Dad's just trying to help. There it was. The family script. Page 1. Paragraph 1. He says you're making things harder than they need to be. I looked up from my crossword puzzle. Really? Yeah. What exactly am I making difficult? Caleb hesitated. Good. Because he didn't know. He was repeating someone else's words. You know, financial stuff. What financial stuff? Silence. Then he shrugged. Whatever. And walked away. That told me more than any confession could. They were talking about me constantly. Even Caleb had been recruited. That evening, something unexpected happened. And it changed everything. I was watering plants in the winter garden when the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I found a young woman standing there. Dark hair, nervous expression, small silver nose ring. It took me a second. Then I recognized her. Sienna Park, Caleb's girlfriend. Mrs. Bellamy? Hello, Sienna. She glanced over her shoulder toward the street, as if making sure nobody had followed her. Can I talk to you? The seriousness in her voice immediately caught my attention. I invited her inside. 5 minutes later, we were sitting in the sunroom. The afternoon light filtered through old glass panels, painting faint patterns across the floor. Sienna wrapped both hands around a mug of tea. She looked terrified. "You're going to think I'm crazy. Try me." She swallowed, then took a deep breath. "I think they're planning something. Not exactly a shocking revelation anymore." But I stayed quiet. Let her continue. "Last week I was at Caleb's apartment." "He has an apartment?" She blinked. "Oh, sorry. I mean his friend's apartment." Interesting correction. Very interesting. "And?" I walked into the kitchen. Her fingers tightened around the mug. "Your son and Whitney were there." My heartbeat slowed. Years of bookkeeping had taught me something important. People tell the truth when they stop feeling rushed. So I waited. They didn't know I could hear them. What were they talking about? Sienna looked directly at me. "The house?" "Of course. Always the house." "What specifically?" She hesitated, then said the words. "They kept talking about getting control before winter." A chill ran through me. Not because of the weather, because of certainty. Before winter. Not someday. Not eventually. Soon, planned. Deliberate. What else? "They mentioned bills." I said nothing. "They said if things got uncomfortable enough," she swallowed, "you'd finally agree." Agree to what? I already knew, but I needed to hear it. Agree to sign. There it was, the missing piece. The thing hiding behind every conversation. Every unpaid bill. Every missing envelope. Every fake smile. Every helpful suggestion. They wanted my signature, and they were creating pressure to get it. Sienna reached into her purse. "I wasn't sure if I should bring this." She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, then handed it to me. A photograph appeared. My stomach dropped. A document. Not fully visible. Just part of a page. But I could clearly read several words. Property Authorization Agreement. And near the bottom, a signature line. My signature line. I looked up. When was this taken? A week ago. A week, meaning paperwork already existed. Before they ever mentioned the consultant. Before the conversations. Before the pressure campaign. The meeting wasn't a suggestion. It was the final step. The paperwork had already been prepared. Suddenly, everything made sense. The utility delays, the missing notices, the mailbox, the consultant, the urgency, the winter deadline. They weren't trying to help me manage my life. They were trying to take control of it. And they had probably been planning it for months. "Does Caleb know?" I asked. Sienna looked away. That answer told me enough. "Why are you showing me this?" Her eyes softened. "Because you're not confused." "What?" "They keep talking about you like you're fragile." A sad smile appeared on her face. "But every time I talk to you, you remember everything." I laughed softly. The first genuine laugh I'd had in days. "Well, that's encouraging." "I'm serious." She leaned forward. "I don't think they realize who they're dealing with." Neither did I. Not completely. Not until that moment. Because sitting there with that photograph in my hands, something finally changed. For weeks I'd been reacting, observing, collecting pieces, trying to understand. Now I understood. And understanding is dangerous. especially for people who think they're the only ones playing the game. After Sienna left, I remained in the winter garden for almost an hour, watching the sunset, thinking, planning. When Darren came home later that evening, he found me sitting calmly in my usual chair, reading, drinking tea, smiling. "Good day?" he asked. I looked up. "The best I've had in weeks." He smiled back, completely unaware of what had just happened. Completely unaware that his secret was no longer a secret. And completely unaware that I had just stopped being the prey. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was afraid, because I was thinking. There's a difference. Fear makes you stare at the ceiling imagining worst-case scenarios. Thinking makes you build plans. And after Sienna's visit, I finally had enough pieces to see the picture. The bills weren't the goal. The paperwork wasn't the goal. The consultant wasn't the goal. The house was, always the house. The next morning, I decided to stop acting like a confused widow and start acting like the woman who spent 28 years managing financial records for one of the largest law firms in Western Pennsylvania. People tend to forget that older women had careers before they became grandmothers. That oversight was about to become expensive. Around 10 o'clock, I drove to downtown Cedar Hollow and parked outside Mercer and Hale Financial Services. The office occupied the second floor of an old brick building overlooking Main Street. Inside, I asked for a man named Vernon Hale. We'd known each other for years, not socially, professionally. When Elliot died, Vernon helped me reorganize investments and retirement accounts. He greeted me with a smile. "Marjorie Bellamy, haven't seen you in a while." "I need a favor." That smile disappeared immediately. People only say those words when something is wrong. 30 minutes later, Vernon was reviewing account activity. His eyebrows gradually climbed higher, then higher again. Finally, he leaned back. "Well." That single word told me enough. "What is it?" "You've had several access requests." I froze. "Access requests?" He nodded. "Information inquiries. Permission modifications. Secondary contact applications." My stomach tightened. "Who submitted them?" He turned the monitor slightly. I read the name. Darren Bellamy, not once. 3 separate times. The earliest request had been filed almost 4 months ago. 4 months? Meaning this started long before the unpaid bills. Long before the consultant. Long before any concern for my well-being. This had been developing quietly behind the scenes, like roots growing beneath a foundation. Did he get access? No. Relief washed through me. Then Vernon added something else. But whoever filed the requests knew exactly which accounts to target. That wasn't luck. That was information. Someone had been studying my finances. When I left Vernon's office, I didn't go home immediately. Instead, I sat inside my car for nearly 20 minutes, watching people walk along Main Street, thinking about trust. The strange thing about betrayal is that the act itself hurts less than the realization. Because once trust breaks, you start revisiting old memories, recalculating them, re-examining them, seeing things you missed. And suddenly, I remembered something. 3 months earlier, Darren had asked a strangely specific question. At the time, it felt harmless. Now, it felt very different. "Mom, if something happened to you unexpectedly, where do you keep the property documents?" I had laughed, told him exactly where. the metal box. Top shelf, hall closet. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. How stupid. Not because I trusted my son. Because I stopped verifying. That afternoon, when I returned home, I discovered something waiting for me. An envelope, sitting on my bed. No stamp, no address. Just my name. Written in Whitney's handwriting. Inside was a business card. The consultant. The same consultant they'd been pushing for days. An appointment had already been scheduled. Tuesday, 11 a.m. At the bottom of the card, someone had written, "We'll take care of everything." I stared at those words. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I finally understood. Nobody was asking for permission anymore. They were already making plans, as if the decision belonged to them. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't worried about what they were going to do next. I was curious how they'd react when they discovered I had started moving first. By Monday morning, the atmosphere inside the house had changed. Not dramatically, not openly, but enough that I could feel it. Like the air before a thunderstorm. Everyone was being unusually nice. Whitney made pancakes. Caleb offered to carry laundry. Darren even asked whether I wanted anything from the grocery store. For most families, those things would sound normal. For mine, it felt like a coordinated operation. They weren't being kind. They were preparing. Tuesday was the consultant meeting, and they thought they already had me. I decided to let them keep believing that. At breakfast, Darren casually brought it up. So tomorrow at 11. I sipped my coffee. Tomorrow at 11. You still planning to go? Of course. His shoulders visibly relaxed. Interesting. Whitney looked up from her phone. That's great. Neither asked why I'd changed my mind. Neither seemed suspicious. Because people get careless when they think they've won. The rest of the day I spent gathering information, not evidence. Information. Evidence proves something happened. Information tells you why. Around noon, I drove to the utility office. Nora Whitcomb greeted me immediately. Marjorie, I need a favor. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in a small office reviewing payment histories. What I saw made my stomach twist. The utility bills had been paid late repeatedly. Not once, not twice, 7 separate times over the previous months. Every single delay followed the same pattern. Money was available, payment was postponed. Late notice issued. Then payment magically appeared. Again, and again, and again. Almost like someone wanted the notices. Almost like someone wanted pressure. Can you print all of this? I asked. Nora nodded. A few minutes later, I walked out carrying a thick envelope. The pattern was impossible to ignore now. Someone had been manufacturing problems. That evening, I discovered just how far they were willing to go. At 6:47 p.m., the lights went out. The entire house plunged into darkness. A second later, the refrigerator died. Then the furnace. Then silence. Real silence. The kind you only notice after electricity disappears. What happened? Caleb shouted from upstairs. Whitney immediately appeared in the hallway. Oh no. The performance deserved an award. Darren rushed toward the electrical panel, or pretended to. I stood quietly near the kitchen doorway, watching, observing, waiting. 5 minutes later, Darren returned. It's bad? How bad? I asked. He sighed heavily. Utility shut off. I nearly laughed. The acting was getting sloppy. Shut off? They say multiple payments weren't received. Interesting, because I had the payment history sitting inside my purse, and I knew exactly which payments hadn't been received. The ones he never submitted. Whitney crossed her arms. We can't keep living like this. There it was. The real conversation. Not the electricity, not the furnace. The pressure. Darren rubbed his forehead dramatically. Mom, this is exactly why we need help managing things. I remained silent. He took that as encouragement. Big mistake. If tomorrow goes well, he continued, all this can finally be fixed. All this, meaning the crisis they created, meaning the fear they wanted me to feel, meaning the trap. Look at the picture for a second. A dark house, no heat, no lights. 3 healthy adults standing around acting shocked while a 66-year-old woman is supposed to panic. If somebody creates the emergency and then sells you the solution, that's not help. That's manipulation wearing a friendly face. The house grew colder as the evening went on. Whitney wrapped herself in a blanket. Caleb complained constantly. Darren paced around, pretending to call utility representatives. Meanwhile, I sat quietly in Elliot's old armchair, thinking, calculating, waiting. Around 9 o'clock, Darren finally sat across from me. His voice softened, the way it used to when he wanted something as a teenager. Mom? Yes? You trust me, right? There it was. The question. The one hiding beneath everything else. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. The gray appearing in his beard. The tired eyes. The man who once cried when his goldfish died. The man who now thought fear was a useful tool. Then I smiled. A calm smile. A dangerous smile. Of course, Darren. Relief flooded his face. He thought he'd won. He thought tomorrow would be paperwork, signatures, handshakes, and control. He had no idea that earlier that afternoon, I had already called an attorney named Celeste Armand. And Celeste had agreed to meet me before the consultant ever saw me. By the time Darren went to bed that night, he was dreaming about ownership. By the time I went to bed, I was planning an eviction. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Not because of anxiety, because for the first time in months, I finally had direction. Outside, a thin layer of frost covered the lawn. The maple tree in the front yard stood motionless against a pale gray sky, and the house was still cold from the previous night's shutoff. I made coffee on a small camping stove I'd kept in the garage since Elliot's fishing days. One thing about growing older, you learn that comfort is a luxury. Preparation is survival. At 8:15, Darren came downstairs. His mood was excellent. Too excellent. The man practically glowed. Morning, Mom. Morning. You ready for today? I poured coffee into my favorite mug, the one with a tiny crack near the handle, the one Whitney kept trying to throw away. I suppose so. His smile widened. Perfect. Let him enjoy it. At 9 o'clock, I left the house. Darren offered to drive me. I declined. Whitney offered too. I declined again. They exchanged a quick glance. The kind people share when they're wondering whether they're losing control of a situation. Good. Let them wonder. Instead of driving to the consultant's office, I headed downtown to Celeste Armand's law firm. The building occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated textile warehouse overlooking the river. Modern furniture, dark wood, floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive without showing off. Exactly the kind of place that made dishonest people nervous. Celeste met me personally. She was somewhere in her early 50s, with silver streaks in her dark hair and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. I liked her immediately. Within 20 minutes, I'd told her everything: the bills, the missing mail, the property request, the consultant, the photograph Sienna showed me, the shutoff, the pressure campaign. When I finished, Celeste leaned back in her chair, silent, thinking. Then she asked a question nobody else had asked. "Marjorie, what do you want?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I know what they're trying to do." She folded her hands. "The question is what outcome you want." Nobody had asked me that. Everyone else had focused on Darren, Whitney, the documents, the house. Celeste focused on me. I thought for a moment, then answered honestly, "I want my life back." A faint smile appeared. Good answer. She opened a legal pad. "Now, let's make that happen." For nearly 2 hours, we reviewed records, account histories, property ownership documents, access requests, everything. Then she found something that changed the entire situation. "Marjorie," her voice became sharper, "have you ever applied for a home equity line of credit?" "No." "Ever?" "No." She rotated a document toward me. "There was an inquiry submitted 6 weeks ago." I stared at the page. My chest tightened. Property address. Correct. Personal information. Correct. Estimated home value. Correct. Applicant relationship. Property owner representative. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means someone was exploring ways to borrow against your house." The room suddenly felt smaller. "Was it approved?" "No." Relief. Brief relief. Then Celeste pointed to another section. "But someone had enough information to start the process." I didn't need her to say the name. I already knew. Darren. Maybe Whitney too. Maybe both. The house had never been the backup plan. The house was the plan. Always. Celeste studied me carefully. "You understand how serious this is." I nodded slowly. "I do now." She closed the file, then stopped thinking like a mother for a minute. That one hurt. Because she was right. Every bad decision I'd made started with those words. He's my son. He's family. He means well. Family can become a blindfold if you're not careful. By noon, we had a strategy. Not emotional, not dramatic, legal, precise. The kind of strategy built from paperwork instead of anger. And that terrified me far more than any argument. Because arguments can be denied. Documents cannot. When I finally left Celeste's office, my phone contained 12 missed calls, 9 from Darren, 3 from Whitney. The consultant appointment had come and gone. Apparently, they were worried. Imagine that. I sat inside my car and listened to a voicemail Darren had left 30 minutes earlier. "Mom, where are you? He's waiting. We talked about this. Call me." The second voicemail sounded less confident. The third sounded nervous. By the 7th voicemail, panic had entered his voice. I deleted every single one. Then I drove home. When I pulled into the driveway, Darren was standing on the porch, waiting, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. Whitney stood behind the front window, watching. The second I stepped out of the car, he walked toward me. "Where were you?" Not hello. Not are you okay? Where were you? I almost smiled. Out. Out where? I locked my car. Running errands. Mom, the consultant waited almost an hour. That's unfortunate. His eyes narrowed. For the first time since this started, I saw uncertainty. Real uncertainty. Like a crack appearing in concrete. Did something happen? I looked directly at him. Actually, yes. The color drained slightly from his face. What? I picked up my purse, then calmly walked past him toward the front door. Today, I learned a lot of interesting things. And for the first time in months, Darren Bellamy looked genuinely afraid. For the rest of that afternoon, nobody mentioned the consultant, which told me everything I needed to know. If the meeting had truly been about helping me, Darren would have rescheduled it. He would have asked what happened. He would have been concerned. Instead, the house became strangely quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a failed plan. Whitney barely looked at me during dinner. Caleb stayed upstairs. And Darren kept disappearing into the garage with his phone. Every time he returned, his expression looked worse. By evening, I knew they were trying to figure out how much I knew. The truth? Not enough. Not yet. But more than they realized. Around 9 o'clock, I was reading in the living room when I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Low voices, urgent voices. I quietly lowered my book. She talked to somebody. That was Whitney. I don't know that. Darren. You saw her face. A pause. Then Whitney again. She's never missed an appointment before. I waited. Maybe we should move faster. My pulse slowed. Whenever people panic, they start making mistakes. Darren exhaled sharply. Not yet. What if she already knows? Then we'd know. Whitney didn't sound convinced. Neither did I. I quietly stood and moved toward the hallway. Not close enough to be seen, just close enough to hear. Then I caught the sentence that finally removed every remaining doubt. If winter taxes hit before we get authority, this becomes a lot harder. Authority. Not help, not support. Authority. Control. Exactly what Celeste suspected. I returned to the living room before either of them noticed me. For the next hour, I sat perfectly still. Thinking. One thing kept bothering me. The timing. Everything seemed connected to winter. Winter bills, winter taxes, winter deadlines. There was something specific they wanted before the end of the year. The next morning, I decided to find out what. At 10 o'clock, I met Celeste again. This time, she had several documents waiting. The moment I sat down, she slid a folder across her desk. You're going to want to see this. I opened it. Inside were copies of public filings, property records, financial inquiries, nothing unusual at first glance. Then I found a familiar address. My address. And underneath it, a note. Potential collateral valuation requested. I looked up. What exactly does that mean? It means somebody was trying to determine how much equity exists in your house. My stomach tightened. Why? Celeste leaned back. Because equity becomes useful when someone wants a loan. The room went silent. I thought about Darren's debts, the expensive truck, Whitney's spending habits, the constant complaints about money. Suddenly, an ugly possibility appeared. What kind of loan? We don't know. Yet. Celeste nodded. Yet. That word echoed inside my head the entire drive home. Yet. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something strange. A black SUV sat across the street. Engine running, driver inside, watching the house. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then I recognized the man climbing out. Graham Voss, the realtor from that dinner months earlier. The one who kept talking about property transfers. Interesting, very interesting. I stayed inside my car and watched. Graham walked to my front door. Whitney answered. They spoke for several minutes. Then Darren joined them. Nobody looked happy. Nobody looked relaxed. Whatever conversation they were having wasn't casual. It looked like damage control. The second Graham noticed my car, the conversation ended. Immediately. He shook Darren's hand, got back into the SUV, and drove away. I sat there another minute, watching my son standing on the porch, watching Whitney whisper something in his ear, watching both of them look toward me, like two people trying to figure out whether a fire was still small enough to extinguish. The answer was no. The fire had already spread. That evening, Darren knocked on my bedroom door. First time he'd done that in months. "Mom, come in." He stepped inside, closed the door behind him. Always a bad sign. Then he sat on the edge of the chair near the window. For a moment, he looked almost like the little boy I used to read stories to. Almost. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you trust Whitney?" The question surprised me. Not because of what he asked, because of who asked it. I studied him carefully. "What kind of question is that?" He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "I don't know." Seems pretty specific. He stared at the floor, then quietly said, "Sometimes people make mistakes." That got my attention. "What kind of mistakes?" He immediately looked up, too quickly. No reason. There was fear in his eyes now, not anger. Fear. And suddenly, I realized something important. For months, I'd assumed Darren and Whitney were working together. Maybe they weren't. Maybe cracks were beginning to form. Maybe somebody was preparing to blame somebody else. Before I could say anything more, his phone buzzed. He checked the screen, and all color disappeared from his face. "What is it?" I asked. He stood up so quickly he nearly knocked over the chair. "Nothing. Lie. Big lie." He hurried from the room. The door closed, and a few seconds later I heard shouting downstairs. Not loud, but heated. Whitney, Darren. Arguing, really arguing. I couldn't hear the words, only the tone. Panic. The kind of panic people feel when a plan starts collapsing. I didn't go downstairs. I didn't interrupt. I simply sat by the window and watched the sun disappear beyond the maple trees. They were worried about each other, and that's when dangerous partnerships usually start falling apart. The next morning, everything exploded. Not publicly, not yet. But inside the house, the cracks I'd been watching finally split wide open. I knew something was wrong the moment I came downstairs. Whitney wasn't in the kitchen. That alone was unusual. She practically lived there. The expensive coffee machine was silent. No scented candle. No morning playlist. Nothing. Just Darren sitting alone at the table staring at his phone. His eyes looked bloodshot, like he hadn't slept. "Morning," I said. He flinched. Actually flinched. Then forced a smile. "Morning? Interesting. Very interesting." I poured myself coffee. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, he broke. "Mom?" "Yes?" "If somebody made a mistake..." There was that word again. Mistake. People always call it a mistake when they're hoping to avoid consequences. What kind of mistake? I asked. He rubbed his face. Just hypothetically. I almost laughed. Nothing honest has ever started with hypothetically. Before he could continue, the front door slammed. Whitney. She stormed into the kitchen carrying a stack of papers. Her face was red. Her eyes were furious. The second she saw me, she stopped talking. The second she looked at Darren, she started again. You didn't tell me she knew. Silence. Pure silence. I sat down, took a sip of coffee, and watched. Darren stood immediately. Not now. When? Whitney snapped. When everything's already gone? My pulse slowed. People reveal more when they're angry than when they're scared. What exactly is gone? I asked calmly. Both of them froze. Whitney looked like she'd accidentally stepped off a cliff. Darren looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. No one's talking to you, Whitney said. Big mistake. Huge mistake. Because for months she'd been careful, polite, manipulative. Today she was angry, and angry people stop pretending. I smiled. This is my house. That shut her up. For a moment. Then she laughed, a bitter laugh. Not for long. The second the words left her mouth, Darren looked horrified. Too late. Way too late. The silence afterward felt enormous, because everyone in that room understood exactly what she'd just admitted. The house? Always the house. Whitney realized it too. Her face immediately changed. But you can't put toothpaste back into the tube, and you can't unsay a sentence like that. She turned and stormed upstairs. A door slammed, then another. A few seconds later, I heard drawers opening, cabinets, footsteps, chaos. Darren remained standing beside the table, defeated. For the first time in months, he looked tired instead of confident. I decided to push, just a little. She seems upset. He didn't answer. Maybe because things aren't going according to plan. Still nothing. Then finally, you don't understand. I almost laughed. No, Darren. I leaned back. I think I understand perfectly. The look he gave me told me everything. He knew. He knew the game was over. He just hadn't figured out how badly. Around noon, my phone rang. Celeste. The moment I answered, I heard excitement in her voice. Marjorie, we got it. My heart jumped. Got what? The missing piece. I stood up immediately. What missing piece? The financial request. I walked into the sunroom and closed the door. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass. What did you find? Celeste didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the kind of certainty lawyers only use when they know they're right. We found the draft application. I sat down. Slowly. The draft. The thing they'd been building toward. The thing hidden behind months of manipulation. What was it? A loan. I closed my eyes. Of course it was. But then she continued. A very large loan. How large? The pause felt endless. $480,000. For a second, I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. My house wasn't a home to them anymore. It was collateral. Almost $500,000, built on the back of 33 years of my life. 33 years of mortgage payments, repairs, sacrifices, memories, Elliot, everything. all reduced to a number, and somebody had been trying to access it. This right here is where a lot of people finally see the truth. The unpaid bills were never the destination. They were leverage. When someone creates pressure so you'll hand over control, the pressure isn't the problem. The control is. And once money like this enters the picture, family masks fall off fast. That afternoon, Celeste and I finalized the next step. The step Darren never saw coming. The locks, the accounts, the legal notices, the property protections, everything. Precise, clean, permanent. When I returned home, I found Caleb sitting alone on the back porch. For the first time in months, he wasn't staring at his phone. He looked nervous, almost guilty. "Grandma?" "Yes?" He hesitated, then quietly asked, "Are we getting kicked out?" The question hung in the air. I looked at my grandson, really looked at him, young, confused, influenced, but old enough to know right from wrong. That depends. On what? I met his eyes. Whether people accept responsibility for what they've done. He lowered his head. And that was the first honest reaction I'd seen from anyone in that house for a very long time. Because deep down, even Caleb finally understood something. The woman they thought they were cornering had stopped playing defense weeks ago. And tomorrow, the consequences would arrive at the front door. The consequences arrived at exactly 8:17 the next morning, not a minute earlier, not a minute later. I remember because I was standing at the kitchen sink washing a coffee mug when somebody knocked on the front door. 3 firm knocks. Professional knocks, not neighbor knocks, not family knocks, official knocks. Whitney heard them first. She appeared in the hallway, still wearing pajamas. "Who is that?" I dried my hands. "We're about to find out." The second I opened the door, I saw Deputy Miles Rourke standing on the porch. Beside him stood Celeste. And behind them was a locksmith carrying a metal toolbox. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Whitney appeared behind me. The color vanished from her face instantly. Darren arrived seconds later. His expression told me he already knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. "Mom," he began. Celeste stepped forward. "Mr. Bellamy?" Her voice was calm, professional, cold. "I suggest you listen carefully." The next 10 minutes were some of the longest of Darren's life, and some of the shortest of mine. Deputy Rourke explained the situation. Temporary property protections had been filed. Financial access restrictions had been documented. Mail authorization concerns were under review. Any attempt to interfere with the property or financial records would create additional legal problems. The deputy never raised his voice. He didn't need to. People tend to listen when consequences are standing in uniform. Whitney exploded first. "This is insane." Nobody answered. "This is our home, too." Deputy Rourke looked at the ownership documents. "No." Just one word. "No." The effect was devastating. Because facts don't care about feelings. And the facts were very simple. The house belonged to me, not Darren, not Whitney, not Caleb, me. For months they had behaved like owners. Today, reality arrived. Whitney crossed her arms. "This is elder abuse." Celeste almost smiled. "No." Again. One word. One devastating word. Whitney hated those. "What would qualify as elder abuse," Celeste continued, "is creating financial pressure against a homeowner in order to obtain control over assets." Silence. Pure silence. Nobody looked at anyone. Nobody moved. because everyone knew exactly what she was describing. And everyone knew exactly who she was describing. The locksmith eventually stepped forward. "Ma'am?" I looked at him. "Yes?" "When they're ready, I can begin." When they're ready, not if. When. The reality finally landed. Darren looked like somebody had punched him in the stomach. Whitney looked ready to attack someone. Caleb looked terrified. And for the first time in months, I felt calm. Completely calm. The shouting started 20 minutes later. Most of it came from Whitney. Apparently, every problem in the world was somebody else's fault. Mine, Celeste's, the banks, the utility companies, the county offices. Anyone except the people responsible. Funny how often that happens. Meanwhile, Darren sat silently at the dining room table, watching everything collapse, watching months of planning disintegrate, watching the future he'd imagined disappear. Around noon, things became even worse for them, because Sienna arrived. Nobody expected that, least of all Caleb. She walked up the driveway carrying a small flash drive. The moment Caleb saw it, he turned pale. I noticed immediately. So did Celeste. Interesting. Very interesting. "Mrs. Bellamy?" Sienna approached me directly. Not Darren, not Whitney, me. "I think you need this." She handed over the drive. "What is it?" Her eyes briefly moved toward Caleb, then back to me. "Copies." "Copies of what?" She swallowed. "Messages." Nobody spoke, not a single word. The air seemed to leave the room. Because everybody understood what messages meant. Evidence. The kind people forget exists. The kind created when they're careless. Celeste immediately took possession of the drive. "Thank you." Sienna nodded, then quietly stepped aside. Caleb looked physically ill. He wouldn't even meet my eyes, which told me all I needed to know. The messages were real, and they were bad, very bad. By late afternoon, most of the packing was finished. Boxes lined the hallway. Suitcases sat near the front door. The atmosphere felt strangely similar to the day they moved in. Only now, nobody was smiling. Nobody was making plans. Nobody was talking about family. At one point, Darren followed me onto the back porch. The rain had finally stopped. The yard smelled of wet leaves and earth. For a while, he just stood there. Then he spoke. "Did you ever love me?" The question surprised me, not because of what he asked, because of how broken he sounded. I looked at my son, the little boy who used to sleep with a flashlight under his blanket, the teenager who cried when Elliot taught him how to drive, the man standing in front of me now. I still do. His eyes filled with emotion. For a moment, I thought maybe we were finally reaching honesty. Then he ruined it. "Then why are you doing this?" There it was. Not an apology, not accountability, not regret, just confusion that consequences existed. I shook my head slowly. "Darren." "What? You still don't understand." His jaw tightened. "Then explain it." I looked toward the house, toward the boxes, toward everything that had happened. Then back at him. "I'm not doing this because I stopped loving you." He stared at me. "I'm doing this because you stopped respecting me." For the first time, he had no answer. None. And sometimes silence tells the truth better than words ever could. As the sun began setting over Cedar Hollow, the final boxes were carried outside. The house slowly emptied, room by room, lie by lie, plan by plan. And before the night was over, one final discovery would make everything much worse for Darren than even he imagined. The house felt different that night, not quieter, lighter. For the first time in nearly a year, I could walk through my own living room without feeling like a guest. The oversized sectional Whitney insisted on buying was gone. The gaming setup that had swallowed Elliot's study was gone. The endless piles of packages stacked by the staircase were gone. Just before sunset, Deputy Rourke finished his final walkthrough. Celeste stood beside me near the front door reviewing paperwork. Everything had gone surprisingly smoothly. Too smoothly, which meant something was probably still hiding. Experience had taught me that. People willing to manipulate rarely stop after one failed attempt. They just get sloppier. As the deputy prepared to leave, Celeste's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then looked at me. A slow smile appeared, the dangerous kind. Well, what is it? I think we just found out why they were in such a hurry. Immediately, my stomach tightened. What happened? She turned the screen toward me. The message came from an investigator she'd hired. Only a few lines, but they changed everything. The equity loan application hadn't been the final goal. It had only been the beginning. There were emails, dozens of them, between Darren, Whitney, and Graham Voss, the realtor. The same realtor from the restaurant. The same realtor I'd seen outside my house. The same realtor who somehow always appeared whenever property was mentioned. My chest tightened. What kind of emails? Celeste's expression hardened. The kind people write when they think they'll never be seen. I sat down, slowly, very slowly. She opened the first document, and suddenly every missing piece clicked into place. Months ago, Graham had prepared a property valuation package, not for me, for Darren. The proposal included projected resale values, estimated profits, potential refinance options, even suggested renovations after ownership transfer. One sentence stood out immediately. Current owner likely to cooperate if financial dependency increases. I read it twice, then a third time, because I wanted to be certain. Current owner. That was me. Not mother, not Marjorie, not family. Current owner. Like I was a problem to solve, a hurdle, an obstacle standing between them and a payday. For a moment, I couldn't speak. 33 years in that house. 33 years. Reduced to a business opportunity. Celeste continued reading. Another email, this one from Whitney. Once she signs authority paperwork, we can restructure everything. Another. The winter shutoffs should push things along. I closed my eyes. Winter shutoffs. There it was, in writing, not a suspicion, not a theory, not a guess. Proof. They had planned it. The cold house. The overdue bills. The pressure. Every bit of it. A strategy. A disgusting, calculated strategy. I expected to feel angry. Instead, I felt tired. Deeply tired. Because once proof arrives, hope disappears. And despite everything, some small part of me had still hoped there was a misunderstanding. There wasn't. Not even a little. The following morning brought another surprise. Caleb returned. alone. No Whitney, no Darren, no attitude. Just Caleb. Standing on the porch holding a cardboard box. I almost didn't recognize him. The arrogance was gone. The confidence, too. He looked exhausted. Grandma? I opened the door. What is it? He held out the box. I found these. Inside were documents, receipts, letters, copies of bills, old bank records. Everything Darren and Whitney had apparently been collecting or hiding. I looked through them quietly, then noticed something else. A folded yellow legal pad page. Handwritten. Caleb shifted nervously. I wasn't supposed to see it. I unfolded the paper. It was Whitney's handwriting, a timeline, actual dates, actual steps, mail forwarding, utility pressure, consultant meeting, property authority, loan application. Every stage mapped out, like a project plan. For a moment, I simply stared. Not because I was shocked anymore, because I was impressed by how far they'd gone. Then disappointed all over again. Caleb swallowed hard. I'm sorry. The words came out small, honest, painfully honest. I knew some stuff was happening. I stayed quiet. I didn't know all of it. Still quiet. I should have said something. Finally, I looked at him. You should have. His eyes filled with tears. And for the first time since this started, I believed somebody in that family was actually telling me the truth. Not because he was caught, because he was ashamed. There is a difference. A huge difference. He stayed for almost an hour. We talked. Really talked. No manipulation, no performance, just honesty. By the time he left, I wasn't sure whether our relationship could ever be what it once was. But I knew something important. Caleb still had a chance. Darren and Whitney were still trying to save themselves. Caleb was trying to become better. Those are very different things. That afternoon, I stood alone in Elliot's old study. His desk had been restored. His photographs were back. His compass sat exactly where it belonged. The room finally looked like his again. Like ours again. Outside, snowflakes drifted through the gray Pennsylvania sky. Winter had finally arrived. The same winter Darren and Whitney thought would force me into surrender. Instead, it became the season they lost everything. And before the week was over, Darren would make one final attempt to get back into my life. Not because he missed me, because he needed something. Again. 3 days later, Darren called. 22 times. I counted. Not because I intended to answer. Because after everything that had happened, the number felt strangely symbolic. 22 calls. Not one apology. Not one letter. Not one genuine attempt to understand. Just urgency. Need. Desperation. The same pattern he'd followed his entire life. By the 4th day, the voicemails started changing. The anger disappeared. The confidence disappeared. Then the excuses disappeared. What remained sounded almost human. Almost. Mom, please call me. Mom, we need to talk. Mom, it's important. Important. Everything becomes important when consequences arrive. I ignored every message. Until Friday afternoon. That's when the knock came. One knock, then another, then silence. I already knew who it was. The security camera beside the porch confirmed it. Darren, alone, standing in the snow. For a moment, I considered not answering. Then I remembered something Elliot used to say. If a person keeps knocking on the same door, eventually you should find out why. So, I opened it. The man standing on my porch barely resembled the version I'd seen a few weeks earlier. His beard was unshaven. His coat looked wrinkled. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. Even his posture seemed smaller, deflated. "Mom?" I waited. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then finally, "Can we talk?" I stepped aside. Not because he'd earned it, because I wanted closure. We sat in the kitchen. The same kitchen where he once did homework. The same kitchen where Elliot taught him how to carve a Thanksgiving turkey. The same kitchen where he'd planned to take my house. Life has a strange sense of humor. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Darren broke. "They left." I already knew who he meant. Whitney. She moved in with her sister. I nodded. Silence. "Caleb moved out too." Another silence. Then he laughed bitterly. A hollow laugh. "Guess nobody wanted to stay once the money disappeared." That was probably the most honest thing he'd said in years. I poured myself tea. Earl Grey. Elliot's favorite. Darren watched quietly, then finally said it. The sentence I'd been expecting. The sentence hiding behind every phone call, every voicemail, every visit. "I need help." There it was. Not, "I miss you." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "How are you?" "I need help." I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time in my life, I saw him clearly. Not as my son, not as my little boy, not as the child I raised. Just a man. A grown man sitting across from me. Responsible for his choices. Responsible for his consequences. What kind of help? His eyes dropped to the table. The mortgage? Of course. Always money. Always. The truck? Of course. The credit cards? Naturally. The lawyer? There it was. The real problem. The investigation. The documents. The loan application. The mess he'd helped create. For a long moment, I simply stared at my tea, watching steam rise from the cup. Then I asked a question. One final question. "Darren." He looked up. When the heat got shut off, his face changed immediately. "What?" "Did you think about me?" Silence. I continued. When the lights went out. Silence. When I sat alone in a freezing house. Silence. When you expected me to panic. His eyes filled with shame. Real shame. Not performance, not strategy. Shame. Finally. And yet somehow it wasn't enough. Because some things arrived too late. He lowered his head. "I'm sorry." I believed him. That's the strange part. I actually believed him. But belief and trust are not the same thing. Not even close. I stood, walked to a drawer, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Then I placed it in front of him. He looked confused. "What's this?" "A list." He unfolded it. The address of a local housing assistance office, a workforce center, a financial counselor, a community legal clinic. Resources, real help, just not my money. Just not my house, just not my life. He stared at the paper, then stared at me. "That's it?" I nodded. "That's help." His eyes watered. "You won't take me back?" I thought about that question. Longer than he realized. Then I answered honestly, "No." The word hung between us. Heavy, final, necessary. Outside, snow continued falling, soft, quiet, the kind of snow Elliot always loved. Darren looked around the kitchen, at the walls, the windows, the old clock, everything he'd nearly taken. Then he stood. Slowly. And for a moment, I thought he might argue, might beg, might blame somebody else one last time. Instead, he nodded. A tiny nod. The first sign of maturity I'd seen from him in a very long time. Then he left. No shouting, no drama, no threats. Just footsteps disappearing down the porch, and eventually the sound of a car driving away. The end. Or at least the end of that chapter. Because life rarely ends with a perfect ending. It just keeps moving. A month later, the house looked completely different. Not because I renovated it, because I opened it. Every Thursday afternoon, women gathered around my dining room table. Widows, grandmothers, retired teachers, former nurses. Women who'd been pressured, manipulated, ignored. Women who thought they were alone. They weren't. Nobody should be. We called it the Sycamore Table. There was tea, pie, paperwork, laughter, advice. Sometimes tears. Mostly strength. The winter garden bloomed again. The study belonged to Elliot once more. The house felt alive. Not because family lived there. Because respect did. And every now and then, when snow fell outside the windows, I'd remember that freezing morning. The dark kitchen, the unpaid bills, the sticky note, the fear. Then I'd look around the room and smile. Because they thought fear would make me surrender. Instead, it reminded me who I was. Personally, I would have called a lawyer the moment the heat went out. Marjorie chose a different path. She gathered proof, stayed patient, and let the truth do the work. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't anger, it's consequences. If you were Marjorie, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this.